Hi, everybody. Welcome to High Returns for Real Estate Investors, Chicagoland Real Estate. I'm Melinda Cabania, and I am joined today by Al Dynia, and we are going to be talking about tenant landlord. What are the rights? I think we're having a lot of questions about what the rights are right now between landlords and tenants during COVID-19. So Al Dynia is a real estate attorney as well as a tax attorney. And so he's going to be discussing these topics. And I think I have a couple of questions that have come up from some of my investors. So you ready, Al?
I'm ready. Go ahead and shoot.
I think the first one is that I'm getting as investors are telling me, my tenants aren't paying and they're telling me that there is nothing that they can do about it. How true is that for landlords during COVID, and what can they do after?
Well, unfortunately, it's very much true from a landlord perspective that, right now the court system previously was closed until at least May 18th under the prior order. And then with Governor Pritzker extending the stay-at-home order, the court has also extended the closure of the court through May 30th. So at this point, really, a landlord, short of working with their tenants on trying to come up with some other kind of solutions, they really are kind of hamstrung in terms of what they can do. Going to the courts is not something they can do. The sheriff also, even if there was an order that was available, the sheriff has also stayed enforcement of those orders. So right now, landlords are really left with trying to negotiate with their tenants. And I would say that that's probably not a bad idea from the standpoint of coming up with some kind of successful resolution, understanding that landlords and tenants are kind of in the same facing the same problems that everybody else, quite frankly, in the world is right now.
Yeah. So I guess the other question I have is I have investors saying, I want to buy buildings, but what happens if they buy the building and then they bring in tenants and then the tenants don't pay? So for new tenants, can they sign some sort of agreement or come up with some sort of just something to reassure that those landlords are going to get paid? Is there something that can be done?
Well, realistically, there's no additional document that's really necessary, nor is there really one that's available, because the lease presumably, if the landlords are doing things what I say the right way by executing written leases, that lease is the document that already is the tenant's obligation and promise to pay their lease obligations, right? So in the event that they eventually default on those, that's the document that the landlord relies on to file an eviction matter, right? Now, there are some other things that I would suggest that landlords probably go about doing right now, and that might be vetting their tenants a little bit more, making sure they're really digging into their backgrounds and doing their background searches, taking a look at what kind of jobs the tenants have. Are they in industries that are really affected by what's going on, or are they in industries, for instance, they work for IDOT, or they work for the city, or they work, in first responders. Obviously these people are covered, their salaries are protected, and that. So that's one thing I would suggest. And there's also the opportunity potentially if there's a tenant that's a little bit more financially secure, one of the things that the landlord might consider is asking for prepaid rent, right? Mm-hmm. Asking for several months up front. Certainly that may come with other obligations in terms of whether interest needs to be paid on that, and how does that money need to be segregated. Those are certainly issues that they should address with their attorneys, but that's something else that's available. But in terms of additional documents, again, other than the background search, a very thorough background search, and the lease itself, I think that is the document that protects the landlord.
So if you have current tenants that are in place saying that there's nothing that the landlord could do to get them, to get out, and because they can't get evicted, would you recommend at least to have these landlords take copious notes and all communication be recorded so that when they do go to evictions court, they can say, May 14th, May 8th, May 1st, I contacted this person to say, this needs to be done, and this was my answer, and have emails copied and such?
Well, I certainly think taking notes is a good idea. Don't forget that obviously if you're talking about recordings, the parties have to be advised they're being recorded, and there's certainly issues about whether those matters can be entered in a court setting. Taking notes, but don't forget that the foreclosure procedures are set by law and statute here in Illinois, right? And so there are very formal rules that have to be followed with how that notice is tendered. And again, they should seek legal help if they're going to be doing that. The key that I think that, you know, kind of what you were going towards and what I heard too was that tenants need to be aware that just because they may be in a situation now where they can't pay their rent, that's not absolving them of their obligation, okay? And I think Governor Pritzker has said that in some of his speeches. Mayor Lightfoot has addressed it as well, stating that, yes, while we understand that there may be a moratorium on evictions, and there are certain, you know, government entities that have put moratoriums on evictions. For instance, if there's a multi-unit, a multi-family building that is either with Freddie or Fannie Mae, right? There's some resolutions there, but again, you know, that doesn't absolve the tenants of the opportunity to pay, so they may get sued, right? And if the landlord decides to go down that route, files an action, right? They may seek an action not only for possession of the property, but also seek to enforce, you know, obtain a judgment if they win it, and then enforce that judgment, right? And so, you know, tenants have some real concerns, and that's why, you know, going back, that I always say that, you know, having done some collections work in the past, you know, typically you don't want to dodge your creditors, right? And a landlord is one of them. Typically, if you sit down and talk to them, tell them where you're at, tell them what's going on, right? And you can back that up, and your landlord, you know, and if your landlord asks for backup, right, be glad to provide it, be truthful, but, you know, be willing to work with them, right? For instance, you know, I just negotiated one situation the other day where the rent is $1,500 a month, okay? And right now the tenant can't afford to pay it. She provided the letter she received that she was on furlough, right? So the landlord said, you know what, how about are you willing to do, let's say we get you off for 2 months, right? Presumably she'll be back to work in June. And then for those 2 months, that what you would have paid will break out that rent over 3 months, right? So take an extra $1,500 and she'll be paying $2,000 per month, starting, I think, in, I don't know if it was July or August, right? And that way she makes good for the months that she can't pay, and then there's a resolution, right? And
Right.
the only thing I would just suggest that if that happens, right, landlords and tenants get all of that in writing, right? Either
Yeah,
as a lease,
right.
as a lease amendment, right, as a new lease or something along those lines, and just make sure you document all of that.
Yeah, I think that maybe sometimes tenants think that, you know, these buildings are owned by huge corporations, and not always. They're just owned by an individual person that's also trying to make ends meet. So maybe even, you know, just cover me for your mortgage, for the mortgage part, and then
Right.
out the rest. I mean, it's
Certainly, yeah. I mean, there's honestly what we're seeing right now. I mean, these are unprecedented times, and what you're seeing right now is all kinds of, you know, all kinds of different agreements being worked out. Right. I've had some landlords say, you know what, I'll waive the rent. They're a little bit more financially secure. Right. The buildings maybe are not encumbered by debt. Right. They own them outright. That's a little bit easier for a landlord. Right. But our concerns are, right, realistically, if you're a landlord, if you're on the landlord side, right, these people potentially have mortgages to pay, right? They have real estate taxes, upkeep of the building. You know, some leases provide that the landlord also pays the utilities. So there's a real concern there in terms of what the status and condition of the properties may be. And then from a tenant side, we obviously want our tenants to have places to live, and then we want them to have good places to live. And so honestly, I think the best approach is that you have a sit down, you have a phone conversation. Well, not a sit down, strike that. but a phone conversation, and and try to work something out. You know, I'm finding that for some of the old school kind of folks that are kind of set in their ways, I'm finding that most people are kind of understanding of what the situation is and are willing to work on a deal.
Do you think that there are other rights the landlords have in helping them get paid, or is the state protecting them in any way? Like, is there anything that's being given to them to help?
It's a great question. You know, I'm going to be very honest. I don't think the state's necessarily helping landlords, right? I think the state, if anything, is helping tenants. Okay, the presumption always being that your business investor is supposed to be more savvy, maybe, and more financially secure than your everyday tenant. Okay, so those are the things that have done along those lines is the moratoriums, for instance, where they've said and the sheriff saying he's not going to enforce evictions, or the city is saying they don't want new evictions filed, and the governor's saying that, right? So you've really got this push, and I mean, even the federal government's involved, right? As in terms of Freddie and Freddie saying that if you have a multifamily building, all right, as long and let's say you work out of forbearance, and a forbearance is simply that they may delay your payments for 12 months.
Right.
Their guidelines are providing that as long as if you take advantage and avail yourself of those programs for the amount of time that you're on that forbearance, you also cannot evict anybody, right? So where that program's a little bit more, I think, neutral, right? It helps both the landlord and consequently helps the tenant. I think most of your programs are kind of geared more for the tenant in saying, let's keep the people in there. But again, and I'll say this again, neither our governor nor the mayor, nor have I heard any of the mayors here in Illinois say that the parties are absolved of their rights, right? And that's the key, is that certainly it's an opportunity to not pay now while you're not working,
Right.
but you may have to, pay the piper when that time comes.
Right. Now, I think the other question I have too, which I think has come up a lot, and that's just within the community, is what if I'm a tenant and I can't pay? What should I do? And do we have, rights too, if you're like in a tower, or if you're, renting from a private owner?
Well, I think, first of all, I think what I mentioned earlier, the first thing you should do is call your landlord and explain the situation, right? Again, I think being forthright and letting them know so they're not wondering, and don't make them act, right? If the landlord doesn't have to evict you, landlord, if you've been a good paying tenant and you've never been a problem, landlord doesn't want to get rid of you, right? Okay, you've got presumably maybe you have some history, even if it's a short history, you have some history. So presumably the landlord's going to want to keep you, right? Give him the opportunity, him or her. Talk to him, right? The other issue is, or the other benefit I would say, is that you can also potentially apply for various government programs, okay? The city has a couple programs that I think if I wrote it down correctly, the Chicago Community Trust and United Way Chicago Community COVID-10 Response Fund. That's a mouthful, okay? But that's out there for renters to apply for coronavirus relief, right? Potentially to help them pay some rent, etc. Okay, and then conversely, landlords may also be able to apply for some emergency economic relief through the SBA. Okay.
Has been a little bit crazy.
Well, and that's why I say may be able to.
Okay.
Because as both an attorney and a CPA, I've counseled a lot of clients and other real estate agents on how to apply for some of these programs. I'll be honest, a lot of them are getting some help. It all depends on how you're structured and what program you're applying for, right? But I would always say, at least give it a chance, right? I just got a text maybe an hour ago from one of my realtor friends and agent who said he got $1,000 EIDL, right, which is the Economic Impact Disaster Loan, right? And I sent him kind of a sad face, and I said, this is the only thing that comes to mind that I can respond with, because I'm not sure whether he wanted me to be happy about it. He's like, hey, at least it's something, And that's the point is that so that's the lowest I've seen. And then I had another individual who reported their income correctly. She got $21,000. I mean, she got basically the maximum you could get.
For EIDL?
For the yes, yeah, okay. No, she got the payment protection program.
Oh, the PPP. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And that's a whole another conversation for another time, right? Yeah. Understanding the different programs and what's necessary, but but both tenants and landlords should consider applying for those. Especially tenants may also want to consider applying for unemployment, right? Many people don't realize that if they're even if they're partially employed or part-time, okay, they can still qualify, right?
What about people who are self-employed? Can they qualify?
They can, absolutely. I mean, people that are self-employed, again, much of that depends on how they file their taxes, whether they've done things a certain way and done it correctly. But self-employed individuals, in terms of PPP, can apply. There's also some opportunities to apply for the IDL. And there will also, effective May 11th, will be an opportunity to apply through the IDES, Illinois Department of Employment Security, for unemployment compensation, which is the first time I think we've ever seen that in the history, right? That self-employment help has been made available by by the state, and that's actually as supported by the federal government, right?
Right.
As a function of the CARES Act.
Well, maybe we can talk about that again then.
Yeah. we might have to save more than 10, 15 minutes for that one.
Right, right. Yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit about programs, so we can, I'll ask a couple of the followers and see what they would like to hear about.
Sure, absolutely.
Fine. So is there anything else, any other information that you'd like to share with people about the tenants, landlords? Or?
No, I think, I mean, listen, you can talk about it. You can talk about it in great length. I think the parting message I really want to, I would leave, your listeners and your watchers with is that, if you're in the situation, whether you're a landlord or a tenant, okay, approach the situation with patience, calm, and understanding. Okay. All right. That, people that are residing in a home obviously need that home to stay in, right? We all need shelter, okay? Being in a shelter-in-place order, there's never been a time that has been more true. And so I think as long as the parties come together and try to have that discussion versus one party just saying, I know you can't do anything right now, screw you, okay?
Right.
Pardon me being so blunt, right? That's a terrible approach, because now, as soon as those moratoriums get lifted, what do you think those landlords are going to do, right? They're going to go right to eviction, right? Rather than having worked something out and maybe preserving that relationship. So I would just say understanding and try to negotiate something. And if you get something negotiated, get it in writing. Okay, get it in writing.
That's really good advice. Thank you so much, Al, for coming on. And everybody will be back tomorrow at 5. If you are a CEO and you would like to come on and talk about your business, please let me know. You can DM me. And otherwise, we will see you tomorrow at 5. Thank you again, Al. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.